Hello, it's Monday, the 13th of March 2023, and it's not enough that I've been buying LaserDiscs online. 2 months ago, I went to a record sale, a vinyl sale, and as luck would have it, there was a dude slinging secondhand LaserDiscs, and at this point, there was no way I was going to walk away from that empty-handed. So got a couple more LaserDiscs to show off today. A couple of cinematic heavy hitters, as it were. A couple of very iconic films. So let's get to it. This is a 1990 American LaserDisc from Warner Home Video for A Clockwork Orange, the 1971 film directed, produced, and scripted by Stanley Kubrick, based on the 1962 novel by Anthony Burgess. So, yeah, this is a hugely iconic film, enormously controversial upon its release, and still one of the most infamous movies ever made for its frank depiction of violence. So this is a movie made in 1971, sort of set in the ill-defined near future. It's all to do with gang violence, and it's sort of a morality story to do with free will, behavior modification, that sort of thing. So this is obviously it's a tremendously famous film. It's at the center of it, of course, is the star-making performance by Malcolm McDowell as the story's protagonist, Alex. Is kind of it sort of did for Malcolm McDowell what playing Norman Bates did for Anthony Perkins. It was such a indelible, infamous performance that it kind of, to an extent, it sort of dogged him for the rest of his career. But he's still made he's been in a lot of good movies, and he's had a lot of good roles apart from this. But this is the role that Malcolm McDowell will be forever associated with. As you can see, this LaserDisc, it doesn't really deviate much from the famous original poster of the film that was designed by Bill Gold. Such a classic minimalist, instantly recognizable design. So yeah, they didn't really mess with it, which is a good thing. And here we have the back. So yeah, we can see some images from the film there. So this is a 2-disc release. So 4 sides, although it's only 3 sides. Only 3 sides actually have any material on them. So we'll just take a look. Yeah. So there we go. Side 1, side 2. Side 3 and side 4. We can see side 4 says, program material has been recorded only on the other side of this disc. So side 4 doesn't have anything on it. So the film itself, Stanley Kubrick's screenplay, it doesn't deviate very much from Anthony Burgess's novel. Like pretty much everything that's in, well, most of what's in the novel is in the film, and there's such great, great production design, fantastic music. There's a great soundtrack with classical music and a lot of sort of synthesized musical treatments by Wendy Carlos. And there's a lot of great supporting actors in this as well, particularly Patrick McGee, who's a Northern Irish actor that I really like. He's appeared. He went on to work with Stanley Kubrick again in Barry Lyndon, which was Kubrick's next film after this. So this wasn't the first Stanley Kubrick film I ever saw. I believe the first Kubrick film I saw was The Shining, which I saw when I was a teenager. I'm not sure of the chronology. I think I might have seen 2001: A Space Odyssey before I saw A Clockwork Orange. But it's one of those films where, when I was a teenager, I was really getting into the films of Stanley Kubrick, and A Clockwork Orange, it was like a film that was sort of, its reputation was, I was sort of well aware of it before I actually saw the film. It was like, such a iconic film. I'd seen the posters and, the images from the film and everything, and I'd seen it referenced and stuff. And the thing was, at the time, you couldn't see the film in Australia, not legally anyway, because the film, rather famously, Stanley Kubrick withdrew the film from circulation in Britain following its initial theatrical release because of concerns of copycat violence, and Kubrick sort of getting blamed for provoking or inspiring violent incidences. So Kubrick was like, okay, enough of that. He withdrew the film from circulation, and in Australia, that the ban on the film in the UK, it was replicated in Australia, so you couldn't get the film on video or anything, not legally anyway. And the very first time I saw the movie, I do remember this. It was what happened was a friend of mine had a copy that was made by it was like training a film camera, training a video camera onto a playback of the film. So the film was being played on video against a television screen, and then a camera was held up against the screen to sort of capture it. And then my friend had a copy of that, or a copy of a copy, and then he lent it to me, and I made a copy of it. So like the first version of A Clockwork Orange I was familiar with. It was kind of like a third or fourth generation copy of an image that was captured on the screen from a video camera. So I mean, the quality, the audio and visual quality was a bit wobbly, but it was still, for me, it was perfectly watchable. You could, I got everything from the film that was there, albeit in not the best quality. And so I watched the film repeatedly. This was in, I think, 1997 or 1998. So I'm still in my last couple of years of high school, my senior years of high school, and I was really into this movie. I was just watching it repeatedly. And it was, I kind of, I sort of convinced myself for a while that it was my favorite movie, my favorite movie, at least at that time it was anyway. So Stanley Kubrick died in 1999, and not long after that, A Clockwork Orange became available legally in the UK and in Australia. So this is the first legal copy of the movie, the first official copy of the film that I own. This is a 2000 video from Warner Home Video. I didn't actually. I got this for free, funnily enough. It was. There was a competition from the local video store. I can't remember what it was, what you had to do, whether you had to answer a question or whether you just had to fill in your name and address or something. But anyway, so I won this free copy of A Clockwork Orange. You can see there it says available for the first time. So yeah, it felt like kind of a big deal when I finally got an official, proper version of the film in relatively good audio visual quality, as best as you could get from VHS back in those days. So yeah, this is good to have. So since then I've upgraded quite a few times. I got the film on DVD and I got it on Blu-ray. So yeah, from once upon a time I just had a shoddy third or fourth generation VHS copy, and now I am swimming in copies of A Clockwork Orange. I have also fortunately had the opportunity to see A Clockwork Orange on the big screen. It's one of those films. I think it's sort of maybe even before the commercial video ban was lifted. I think it was a film that was still played in art house cinemas in Perth. Anyway, so I have seen it a couple of times at least. I remember at least one occasion I saw it as part of a double bill with Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers, which was a pretty violent night at the movies, I have to say. There are still so many things about this movie that I like. Although, I think some of the content of this film actually probably disturbs me more now than it did at the time. So we can chalk that up to I don't know, maturity or conscience or whatever. But anyway, there are still a lot of things about this movie that I really like. The performance by Malcolm McDowell as Alex, it's such a great performance, and it's like it's kind of, I think what disturbed audiences at the time was the sort of conflicted feelings they felt, because Alex is, he's a psychopathic, sociopathic, amoral, evil character, but he is like perversely charismatic, and he has a I think it's because most of the other characters in the movie are all kind of sort of grotesque caricature. Like Alex is really the only character in the movie that has any, I guess, it's difficult to sort of say, I guess, likability, personality, charisma, whatever you want to call it. It's a really good performance. You do kind of end up sympathizing with him, although he is the narrator, so he kind of gets you on his side, even though you're kind of repulsed by his thoughts and actions. But it is a really good, very, very unnerving performance. The music, as I said before, is really, really good, especially the use of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which is used quite prominently in this movie, also as a plot point and not just as a stylistic device. Yeah, so this is a film that it's actually it's sort of interesting that this movie was released in 1971, and I don't know what was going on in the zeitgeist or what was going on in the drinking water of filmmakers, but it seems like 1971 was a really it was kind of a groundbreaking year for pushing the boundaries and sort of depicting like it felt like the movies were just becoming a lot more violent just in that 1 year alone. I mean, in 1971, you had Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, you had William Friedkin's The French Connection, there was Don Siegel's Dirty Harry, Ken Russell's The Devils, Ted Kotcheff's Wake and Fright. And there was also, I mean, there were other movies like 10 Rillington Place. I mean, there was just a lot of movies that were just really kind of disturbing with, the content with, the violence and stuff. And yeah, I don't know. It was, there's probably even more. That's just the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, it was a very, very interesting year. Oh yeah, Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs. I knew there was one I was missing. That's another 1971 film that was enormously controversial because of its violence. So yeah, my point stands. 1971, very violent year for movies. So further to the film of A Clockwork Orange, there is of course the 1962 novel by Anthony Burgess, which is quite infamous in a sense that Kubrick, although Kubrick was a great admirer of the novel, he didn't care for the final chapter, which sort of ended on a note of optimism for the fate of Alex and for society. Yeah, Kubrick didn't really go for that, so he when he wrote the screenplay, he excluded the book's final chapter, and so the movie sort of ends on a note of like bleak, pessimistic irony, which is not really too surprising because if you've seen the films of Kubrick that are based on novels, including Doctor Strangelove and The Shining, and probably some others, like Kubrick, he doesn't really go for happy endings. Like if the original novel has a note of redemption or whatever, like when Kubrick makes a film, he's gonna twist a knife in and make the ending kind of more brutal. But anyway, I'm a big fan of the book. It actually this is my gateway into the works of Anthony Burgess, who's one of my favorite authors. I bought most of, if not all of Burgess's novels, and I think I've read most of them at this point. But anyway, Clockwork Orange is one of those books where I can't help but buy multiple copies. Although some copies of this book have the original final chapter and some don't. So we can see some the various versions that I have. Yep. And yeah. Funnily enough, I didn't retain a copy of the very first edition of A Clockwork Orange, the book that I bought. I believe I gave that away to a friend, probably after I'd started buying all these other editions. But yeah, so it goes. Anthony Burgess was, of course, he was a very skilled linguist, and the book is written in the gang youth dialect that Burgess basically invented, called Nadsat, which is sort of derived from a lot of things like Cockney rhyming slang, King James Bible. There's a lot of Russian words in there too. It's interesting because I saw the film many times before I read the book, and when I read the book, it was like, it all made perfect sense to me because I'd seen the film. Had I read the book first, I might have found the language impenetrable. The narration by Alex, which is in the invented slang that Burgess had created, it might have been more difficult for me to pick up. In fact, some versions of the book actually have a glossary at the back explaining the meaning of all the words, the strange words that are in the book. I think A Clockwork Orange sort of turned out to be something of an albatross around the neck of Anthony Burgess. I don't think he was entirely happy with being associated with the film and the book. I mean, I don't think he thought he thought the book was him writing at the height of his powers. I think he always kind of resented like this being the book that he was most famous for, and I think he was also annoyed with the film when the film became quite infamous and controversial. He kind of was dragged into all the the media surrounding the film, and I don't think he really liked that. But anyway, Burgess, he actually wrote many years later. He wrote a play version of A Clockwork Orange. I think he was kind of maybe trying to take authorship of the story back away from Stanley Kubrick, and maybe sort of remolding the story to sort of suit his ideas. Yeah, so I have actually seen a stage version of A Clockwork Orange. About 10 years ago, I saw a version, but I don't think it was. I'm not entirely sure if it was the play that Burgess wrote, or a different version. Play that I saw, it was very stylized. I think it kind of went out of its way to sort of differentiate itself from the Kubrick's film. So like the Droogs, Alex and his gang members, they all wore black, if I remember correctly, and it was kind of the play. It had a sort of a much more queer, fetishistic sort of feel to it. Like there weren't any female performers in the play. Like all the female characters were played by men. So it was sort of an interesting. It was quite an interesting version of the story. But I can't remember if that was the play that Anthony Burgess wrote.
He is one of the most acclaimed and controversial filmmakers of all time. In 1979, his adaptation of Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness captured the horror of Vietnam and instantly became a classic.
This is a 1991 LaserDisc edition from Paramount Home Video of Apocalypse Now, the 1979 epic war movie about the Vietnam War. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, written by John Milius, Francis Ford Coppola, and Michael Herr, and starring a great cast. Martin Sheen, Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, Frederick Forrest, Albert Hall, Lawrence Fishburne, Harrison Ford, Dennis Hopper. It's just a great movie. So we'll have a look here. So this is the back. So this is a 2-disc 4-side edition. We've got the movie on the first 3 sides, and then we've got the credits on side 4. So we'll have a look at the inside. So we've got a message from Francis Ford Coppola. We can see Marlon Brando, Martin Sheen, Robert Duvall, and Dennis Hopper. So yeah. So I picked up this LaserDisc the same time I got A Clockwork Orange, and it's interesting because both movies, to me, I get a little nostalgic when I think about Apocalypse Now and A Clockwork Orange, because they're sort of movies that, like, I kind of felt they were fundamental to the period when I felt I was transitioning from being just someone who liked movies into someone who was like, really getting into, cinema. If that doesn't sound too pretentious. So Apocalypse Now is another one of those movies where, you get to a certain stage when you watch movies, you sort of you catch movies. You go out and see movies and everything, and then once you sort of start to develop a knowledge, a sort of a knowledge of film history, film literacy, more pop culture awareness, and you're sort of aware that there are movies out there that you kind of feel that you have to see, you have to sort of seek out and watch, because you think they're important movies, they're getting referenced and talked about. And Apocalypse Now is like one of those movies. So like I was aware of this movie, its reputation, and it was being referenced and talked about and everything. And so it's one of those movies that I just remember it was a movie that I really, really wanted to see. And it didn't disappoint. I think I'd probably already seen the Godfather movies by this point, so I was sort of getting into knowing who Francis Ford Coppola was, and I knew that he made Apocalypse Now. So this is a movie that I really wanted to see. I think one of the other reasons I really wanted to see this film was because I'm in the 1990s. It was such it had become part and parcel of this film's reputation that it had such a troubled production. So the film, it was supposed to have it was originally supposed to have a shoot of I believe 5 months. So Francis Ford Coppola, the cast and crew, they went to the Philippines, and what was supposed to be a 5-month shoot ended up taking more than a year. So it began filming in 1976. The film was eventually released in mid 1979. And there were all these stories about the troubled production. Like Harvey Keitel was originally cast as the main character, Captain Willard. He was fired and replaced by Martin Sheen. Martin Sheen suffered a heart attack on the set. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and not having really learned his role. The helicopters that Coppola had requisitioned from the Philippine government were sort of being diverted away from the film because they were fighting a civil war. There was like typhoons that wrecked the sets. There was all sorts of drug use and craziness and sort of haphazard stuff going on. And it's kind of like when you talk about movies that had troubled productions but somehow ended up being not just watchable, releasable films, but also masterpieces. Like I think Apocalypse Now is just one of those films that gets talked about. So the film, it was sort of loosely adapted from the 19th century novel by Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. It was updated to the Vietnam War, and it was so it became less a story about European colonial expansion and more a tale about war, the folly, the madness of war. Although the film, it also was, I believe, it was heavily influenced by Werner Herzog's Aguirre, The Wrath of God, which had been released in 1972. It does have that same kind of, river hallucinogenic sort of, strange tableau sort of feel about it. So Martin Sheen plays a government assassin, Captain Benjamin Willard, who's tasked with in the midst of the Vietnam War, he has to travel by boat from South Vietnam into Cambodia to sort of go deep into the jungle to track down and assassinate or terminate with extreme prejudice this rogue American military commander, Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, who sort of got his own army and everything. So it's a very bizarre hallucinogenic film. It's just filled with so many great sequences. There's obviously the famous helicopter battle sequences, all those lines, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, never get out of the goddamn boat, and and so forth. It's just it's a real experience, this movie. The troubled, chaotic production of Apocalypse Now was the subject of a very, very good documentary film, one of the best films about the making of a film, Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse. So there's a lot of great stuff in this movie, a lot of great material, interviews with the cast and crew. George Lucas, who was originally supposed to direct this as it was originally planned, and then he went off and did a little movie called Star Wars instead. So this is really good. There are several. I've got several versions of Apocalypse Now on DVD, and some versions do include this documentary as an extra feature, and some don't. The first VHS copy of Apocalypse Now that I had, I think it was like a copy. It was unofficial. This is actually the very first official VHS copy of the film I ever owned, and I dug this up, and I was actually quite surprised to learn something, and that's it's still, I don't know if you can tell, it's still in its shrink wrap. It's this video cassette. It still hasn't been watched, hasn't been opened. So yeah, I'm not sure what was going on there. It's quite possible that I bought this to replace the unofficial version that I had, and maybe I hadn't watched it, and then the next copy of the film, maybe the DVD came out and I bought that, so there was no need to sort of open this one up. But anyway, yeah, little mystery why I never opened this. Some other items of Apocalypse Now related merchandise. This is a really, really good book, a making of book, the making of Francis Ford Coppola's epic, the Apocalypse Now book, by Peter Cowie. This was, I believe it was first published in 2000, and there was an updated edition in 2001. This is the 2001 edition. And as someone who, for many years, aspired to and eventually achieved the ambition of getting a film making of book published, this was a very inspirational text. So the film has fantastic locations, shooting, brilliant production values, great use of music, including most famously the music of The Doors and Richard Wagner. And one of the things that I love about Apocalypse Now is that's the original poster artwork that's being used for the LaserDisc. So this is by the great commercial artist Bob Peak, who did a lot of film posters in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. He kind of his artwork sort of fell out of fashion sort of by the early 1990s, which is a shame, because I still think he's the best film poster artist of all time, and this is absolutely one of his best and most famous posters. It just uses that style of his, that sort of bold, vivid, impressionistic design. It just looks absolutely great. So I'm such a big fan of Bob Peak that I went and bought this book, this really, really gorgeous book, The Art of Bob Peak. Unfortunately, the English language version of this book is long out of print and very expensive, so I had to buy a Japanese edition. So the text is all in Japanese, which is, Ideally, I would have liked to have had an English language version, being unable to speak Japanese. But at the end of the day, I'm buying this for the artwork, and all of that is, the artwork is the same no matter what language the text is in. But anyway, so I have a quick look at this. So there is a section on Apocalypse Now. We can sort of see what's really good is this book. It includes not only the original poster, but also sketches and alternate poster designs that weren't used, as far as I know. So we can sort of see that's looks really good. That's obviously imagery from the film. There's a shot of Marlon Brando. I really would like to know what all this text is. I imagine it's probably reminiscences by Bob Peak regarding the creation of this great artwork. So here we can see there's a sketch version of the poster with it's slightly different. We can sort of see Martin Sheen in profile there, and the picture of Brando is different, although essentially the design is the same. We've even got like the sun and the helicopters like it is on the final poster. Yeah, I'm not sure what that. Oh, that's Colonel Kurtz. That's a bit wackier, I think. And the helicopters, and yeah, I just love this artwork. Yeah, so again, we can see that's fairly close to the finished version, and there's more portraits of Marlon Brando as Colonel Kurtz. Yeah, so he's really. I mean, I wonder if Bob Peak was tired of Marlon Brando's face by the time he'd finished doing all this. There's Kurtz and Willard and Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, played by Robert Duvall. So yeah, and there we can see that's the finished version that we're all familiar with right there. So yeah, so great. This is such a good book. I heartily recommend it. If you're into Bob Peak, or if you're into film art in general, this is a very good book. This is, of course, the original theatrical version of Apocalypse Now. It's one of those films that, there are several variant cuts of it over the years. So from 1979, for roughly 20 years after, the theatrical version of Apocalypse Now was the default version of the film. There was a longer work print version, I think, circulated on bootlegs, but I imagine it would have been incredibly difficult to find. Anyway, in 2001, Coppola released a radically re-edited version of Apocalypse Now. I think it was the original version was over 2 hours long, and then Coppola, he added, I think, an extra 80 minutes to it, and it was released theatrically and on commercial video formats as Apocalypse Now Redux in 2001. I saw that version in the cinema. That was the first time I'd seen any version of Apocalypse Now on the big screen. So you had the two sort of varied editions. There was the theatrical cut and the Redux version, and then in 2019, Coppola made another edit of the film, which was, I believe, called the Final Cut. Which is sort of a compromise between the theatrical version and the Redux version. Like, it deletes 20 minutes from the Redux version, so it's I think it's about 3 hours, about 3 hours long. Yeah, so I actually, it's a little contentious. There were a lot of cinephiles, film purists, fans of the film that really don't like the Redux version, and sort of considered it, kind of a, something akin to a travesty, that Coppola had re-edited the film, the original version being perfect and everything. I, at the risk of sounding like a heretic of sorts, I actually prefer the Redux version. I mean, there are some scenes there that, maybe didn't necessarily need to be there, but there's material put back in there that I really like. And I kind of feel that the longest version of this film is the best version of this film, because it's such a good film. So maybe it's overlong and self-indulgent, but I do like the Redux version. I haven't seen the Final Cut version of that. I don't have that version at all. I imagine if I did watch that version, there's probably scenes from the Redux version that I'd kind of miss, because that's my preferred version. But I mean, it's a sort of thing where there are so many versions of it, and I'm sure they're all available with equal facility, so you can go with whichever version of the film you like. So that's it. God bless the 1970s, God bless cinema, and God bless LaserDisc.